Hi guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. And today I just wanted to talk about MBTI types and business partners. So I've been doing a lot of research about how companies are founded, and I've found that for the most part, majority of startups usually have 2 to 3 founders at least. That even when trying to get investments, you're more likely to get investors with 2 to 3 people as opposed to a single entrepreneur. So now that becomes the question of what is the best personality type to pair up with if you want to start a business. And I wanted to start talking about this from the INTP perspective, just as an example, but the same applies to the other temperaments. You just have to pick and choose the opposites. So primarily, I think that the idea is to pick someone from the same temperament, but with opposing skills. Because in business, one thing that we're taught is you don't want 2 people that are exactly the same or have the same competencies, because they're just going to argue over everything. So for example, if you have one tech person and one people skill person, that's okay. But if you have 2 tech people, then both of them are going to argue about which technology is better. You know, the one will say Windows is better, no, Ubuntu is better, no, Linux Mint is better, no, iOS is better, right? Or is it Safari? Whatever Apple users use. So ideally, you want there to be some differences. However, from research and experience, I think, as I said, the IE dynamic is usually the best in terms of getting along with someone and them adding value. So for example, if we take an INTP like Reed Richards and an ENTP like Tony Stark, both are analytical and creative. It's just Mr. Fantastic is TI first, so analytical, then NE, creative. So he prefers to just analyze things most of the times. Then maybe he'll invent something. Whereas Iron Man is more of NE, creative first, and then analytical second. In other words, he prefers to create things, to create like suits of armor, then go deeper into the analysis. So ideally, this team would be pretty unstoppable, right? And as I said, the benefit is because someone else's second function or their first function is your second function. If they were the same type as you, then they would have to be much better. But because they're a different type, then it's automatically better. So what do I mean by that? I mean that if an INTP is talking to another INTP, right, for that INTP's NE to be stronger than mine would mean that INTP overall would just have to be much smarter than I am. But if it's an ENTP, since they place their NE first, it's not necessarily that they're smarter than me overall. It's just they'll be more creative than me. So it'll balance it out in the sense that they're more creative but less analytical. But they're still analytical enough for us to communicate. In other words, it's unlikely that you're going to find someone who's better than you at everything. I mean, obviously they exist, but we're specifically talking about in a business context where you are partnering with them, right? So what I'm trying to say is you're more likely to find someone who is stronger than you in one area and weaker than you in another than you are to find someone who's completely stronger than you in every area. Though I mean they exist. But again, whether they'd want to partner up with you or not is a different story. So with the ENTP, it's more likely I'd find an ENTP that's more creative than me but less analytical, rather than an INTP who's both more creative than me and both also more analytical than me, right? But even if that was the case, right, even if I was able to find an INTP that was more analytical and more creative than me, the problem is if the two of us join, our inferior function will still be our greatest weakness. So that's the extroverted feeling. So I wouldn't be worried about extroverted feeling in a company, but more so in handling the press, because people who lack extroverted feeling, they're not as in tune with other people's emotion. So they might want to take the company in a certain direction, but the public might have certain concerns or certain issues, but from a logical perspective, it might not make that much sense. So basically, I think that if two types do join to start a business, it's kind of bad. Like that would be my fourth ideal type, but not my top three. If two people of the same type start a business, they're really leaving the weaknesses wide open, wide open. It's kind of like the way Mr. Fantastic, he has the rest of the Fantastic Four to do most of the heavy lifting, most of the action. But if you have two analytical people, maybe they wouldn't be that good at fighting. They'd be too busy analyzing stuff, right? It's the same way if you have two people that are really good at fighting, but they're not that analytical, then there'll be no one to do the analytical stuff, right? So I think it would be nice, and it is possible, but it would only be my fourth preference. It wouldn't be my first. My first, as I said, would be INTP ENTP pairing. So we both kind of have the same weaknesses, but we've leveraged them a bit more. The only question is it enough? Is it enough to counteract? Like, is the ENTP's tertiary FE enough to counter my inferior FE? And is my tertiary SI enough to counter his inferior SI? That's the real question. It can be very tricky, right? It can be very, very tricky because it might seem like a good idea, but having two perceivers, like as I talked about it in my other previous video, in terms of the marriage theory, ideally they say having two perceivers is a bad thing because they'll both be slobs and animals, so none of them will be neat. So for marital purposes, they say at least one person should be a judger, at least. Frankly, I don't necessarily think that that's true. Because one, I think in general, women are neater than men. And two, I believe people can overcome certain, what do you call them, weaknesses or inferiorities. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, like, if you take, let's say, an INTP marries another INTP, first of all, the inferior function is FE, not SI, not SI. So there's this myth, as I said, there's this myth that INTPs are all slobs. Not really. It would be ENTPs that are more slobs. So for example, if if you had INTP ENTP marriage, that would be different because the ENTP would be the slob and the INTP would have to pick up the slack. And I think it would be easy for an INTP to conquer the ability to be clean, but to be clean enough for two people, I think that's a bit challenging. Like, I think it would be an annoyance. when INTP is trying to tell the ENTP, you need to be more tidy, you need to clean up. Like, it's already difficult for them to be neat and tidy, but convincing them to someone else to be neat and tidy as well is a bit too much. But I think if it's too does it work that way? Too introverted perceivers? I think so. I think if it's certain types, then it could work, right? But anyway, my point is an INTP INTJ relationship is more likely to be balanced in terms of getting the day-to-day tasks done, right? Especially if, let's say, the man is the INTJ and the woman is the INTP. I say that because women are naturally cleaner than men. So overall, they won't be that messy. It can still work if the man is the INTP and the woman is the INTJ. It's just the man will be more of a slob than had it been the woman being the INTP in most cases. So back to the business sense. What about INTP, INTJ? I think that can work really well initially. And I think some INTJs are like, very intelligent people, right? Very intelligent people. And the thing I like about INTJs is they don't have the same power dynamics as ENTJs. Like, they're not greedy. They're not greedy for power. And they do respect people as their equals if they see them as being intelligent. They don't enjoy dominating people. Like, they're not afraid to lead, but they don't enjoy dominating people, right? And there are a lot of INTJs that can be extremely smart, or rather, smart INTJs exist. I only think the downside is, in my opinion, the average INTJ tends to come off as being very stubborn and close-minded to the INTP. INTJs are also more of crowd followers than INTPs. So because they use extroverted thinking, which is an extroverted judging function, they try to judge things based on external factors in their environment. So judging whether a product is good or not, they judge it based on how many people is using it rather than the product itself. An INTP would be more logical, and they would try to judge the product based on how it's designed and how it functions rather than how many people use it. So I think the fallacy that INTJs are more likely to commit than INTPs is it three men make a tiger, right? They're more likely to believe something just because a lot of people believe in it, more than the INTP. They do it less than a lot of other types, but more than the INTP. So that can be an issue. But I do think in terms of keeping law and order within a company, it can balance it out, because the INTP can focus more on the idea, but the INTJ, if they're good enough, like if they're one of the exceptional INTJs, they can focus more on time management and meeting deadlines. So think of it as being partnered with Elon Musk, right? Let's say you're the one who comes up with the ideas, but Elon Musk makes sure the ideas are followed through. Like, he contributes to the ideas, but his contribution is more of the planning and the deadlines. Like, okay, this needs to be on time. Let's assign these three people to do the task and these other people to do a different task, that sort of thing. I think the INTJ would be better than that. But as I said, that is extremely rare, right? That is really, really, really rare. Like, INTJs that excel to that position is very rare. So I think it is possible to have an INTP INTJ partnership for a business, but that would require a very exceptional INTJ. And I think that in that case, the INTP can handle more of the public image, because I think with the NEFE, they're better at sort of explaining things in an interesting way. Whereas INTJs in general prefer to work more behind the scenes. They don't chase fame that much. Yeah, so I think I've covered all the types: INTP, INTJ. Okay, ENTJ. I think ENTJs would be a very ideal type for INTPs, but that relationship would more work if it's the ENTJ that seeks out the INTP. Because the truth is, with ENTJs is, they're very dominant, right? Think about Darkseid from DC Universe, or Silco from Arcane, or Azula from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Those are the ones that come to mind. So the thing with ENTJs is they're so dominant that, here's the thing, they don't believe in being equal. They don't believe in being partners, right? With an ENTJ, you either have to be above them or below them, but they do not believe in equals. There is no equality when it comes to ENTJs. They're just extremely, extremely dominant people. Okay. So in most cases, an INTP would want an ENTJ would want an INTP to work for them, not with them. Or they can work for an INTP, but with an INTP, no, it cannot work. So that's the thing. If by chance, if maybe by some miracle, I met an ENTJ who wasn't as egotistical, then maybe it can work. But I think subtly there'd be that tension where I would subtly feel like the ENTJ is always trying to dominate me and take control of the situation, right? And there's also ENFJs. I think ENFJs are pretty good in terms of that pure, like, technical guy versus people person. It just means the INTP would have to be very, 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 very technical. Like, he would have to be really good. So if it was my case, my situation, it means I would have to be extremely good at, like, the computer programming for that ENFJ to be my partner, because he would not be likely to be very good with the programming. I mean, it's possible. I've met an ESFJ who was extremely good at programming, was in like the top of her class most of the time with high distinctions. It's possible, but again, it's not likely. So some things are possible, but not likely. And I think ENFJs are less dominant. They can be, but they believe in together as one, whereas ENTJs just dominate. They just dominate and control. Finally, what I think the plan I think that would make the most sense for me, or what I think the plan should be, is that as an INTP, I should team up with an ENTP and then hire either an ENTJ or ENFJ as a manager. So you look at Microsoft. Microsoft was really started by 3 guys. Everyone knows Bill Gates, but there was Bill Gates, Paul Allen, and the other guy, Steve Ballmer, right? So I would say Steve Ballmer was definitely the EJ, probably one. I don't know which EJ, but it doesn't matter. But for sake of example, we can call him the ENTJ. And Bill Gates, I would say, is the INTP, right? And Paul Allen, I don't know much about him, but I think he was also a technical person. The point is, it was 2 technical people, but then they hired the people person to work under them. And I think that is the key to introverted success. Never be partners with the people person. They must always be subordinate, otherwise they'll try and overthrow you. So yeah. Because look at Apple. You had Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. So I think Wozniak was an INTP and Steve was an ENTJ. Some say he's an ISTP, but Steve didn't actually do most of the coding or programming. Like, he just studied calligraphy. It was Wozniak who was doing all of that stuff. It was Steve mainly pushed the business forward. So you can look at that. Like, Steve didn't see Wozniak as his equal. Yeah. So in other words, my goal is a trifecta. An INTP who finds an ENTP and we balance out the power because there's no power friction between the two. And then we hire an ENTJ or an ENFJ or even an ESTJ to just, the ESTJ will just, manage the people and do the things that we can't with people. I think that's the best idea. In fact, finding the ESTJ is not going to be difficult. It's just finding the ENTP. So I guess I should rule out ENTJ partnership. But yeah, as I said, personality types can be subjective because when you actually meet people, you might find things are different. For example, you might meet a closed-minded INTP and an open-minded INTJ. Yeah, you might find an INTP with more people skills than an ENTP. It can happen, right? Or an ENTP with more planning skills than an INTJ. All these things can happen. So it's more of just a framework. So in terms of how it applies to the other types, so if you're an ISFP, you'd probably be best partnering off with an ESTP, but you might feel dominated. So ISFP, ESFP would be good. Like maybe ISFP, ESFP, then hire an ESTP manager. But that's too much SP. I would say maybe hire like an ESTJ, not an too many SPs is never a good thing, right? But if temperament is that important to you, if you can't really gel with people not from your temperament, then yeah, hire an ESTP. If you're an ISTP, for example, yeah, ISTP, ESTP can work. So that's actually a pretty solid team up, an ISTP and an ESTP. I think they'll just need to hire a feeler. They might hire an ESFP or ISFP, someone with a bit more emotion that can relate to people that way so that they're not complete assholes. And then from the perspective of an SJ, it's the same. If you're an ISTJ, ESTJ, it can work. Like when you have the J in you, like if I was an INTJ, I wouldn't mind working with an ENTJ. There it would make sense, but INTP, ENTJ will clash too much. So again, try and match the E and the I. The formula is simple. Match the E and the I, and the subordinate should be what's missing from the top two functions of the E and the I. So that applies to everyone. So you could do ENFP, INFP, and what's missing is the rational thinking. So hire someone that's a T, right? Or hire someone that's a J, whichever is missing, right? Because it's the T and the J that's missing. You can hire either. So either an ENFJ or ENTJ or ESFJ. As I said, for ISTPs and ISTJs, it's the same thing. It's ESTJ, ISTJ. Hire someone that's a feeler or maybe even a perceiver, right? And if it's ENFJ, INFJ, hire someone that's either a perceiver or a thinker, right? I think that's the general formula of how to approach business partnerships, though I'm not too confident in some of them. Like I'm not sure a team of SPs can be that competent. Maybe some of them will prove me wrong someday. I'm also not sure that an ENFP and an INFP can start a business. that's it's ridiculous. I mean, maybe they have, but I don't know. Because I think if I was an ENFP, I'd rather team up with like an INTJ or an ENTP. That's just my opinion, right? but this was just to showcase. Maybe I'll do part 1 describing how it would work for an INTP, and maybe in other videos I'll go in more depth into the other types.